C64s in space. More about this and other stories on This Week in Retro.
High-resolution color graphics.
This land of high technology.
The revolution in technology that made the information age possible.
Those kids are not afraid of computers.
Have retro games psychologically damaged you?
C64 powers Deep Space Outpost.
Lost Asylum, a work in progress.
An Amiga 2000 mechanical keyboard.
All this, plus our community question of the week on This Week in Retro.
Up-to-date news
for out-of-date tech.
So, John, before we kick off today, first of all, how are you, sir?
Doing great, Neil.
Good. Me too. And just a quick reminder that the RMC charity calendar is still on sale with 100% of profits going to local charity all sorts. It's a calendar made up of retro computers and consoles behaving badly. Looks great. It's less than a tenner, and you can get it at rmcretro.store. So please do go and support the cause and get one. There's also links in the show notes you can go and click on if Duncan would be kind enough to put them there. Now, into our first story. It's a bit of a tongue-in-cheek story to kick us off today, John. It's submitted by a regular listener, Paul, a.k.a. Hermsky. Thank you, Paul. And it's hosted on thedailymash.co.uk. So clearly this is a satirical story. But at the heart of any good satire is always truth. And I think this story rings true with a lot of us. The headline to the story is, "What psychological damage have you suffered from 1980s computer games?" And it reads, "New research suggests gaming can improve well-being, but today's games aren't the maddening frustration fest of the 1980s. Find out how you've been mentally scarred." Now, I should point out that we're not trying to make light of any psychological conditions that people are dealing with here, but we're really reflecting on something that I often hear people say, and I'm sure you do too, John. When we're talking about this retro hobby of ours, we always hear people say older games were harder than newer or present day games. Always hear that wherever I go. So before we explore the article further, what's your position on this, John? Are you a hardcore older gamer, or do you think new games are just as hard?
Well, I do think that by and large, older games were more difficult, but in most cases, I don't think they were actually designed that way. In the old days, especially in the bedroom coder scene in Britain and other places, the whole concept of third-party playtesting was largely unknown. So what you had was the designer of the game playing levels over and over and over again, just to make sure that they worked and they didn't crash the game. And when you do that, of course, you tend to get really good at the game and you don't see the difficulty from the viewpoint of a new player. So also, as anyone who's read 80s computer gaming magazines, the press was much more obsessed with how many total levels there were in a game, how many screens there were in a game, rather than whether the game actually presented a fair difficulty curve. Wouldn't you agree with that, Neil?
I think that's fair enough. Yeah. And I think it's like any kind of creative medium, whether you're writing a book, doing a painting, the more you stare at this thing, the more immune you get to it, I guess, the less you see the detail, perhaps. Mm-hmm. So if you're playing over and over again, what you think is an average difficulty game might well be completely impossible to the rest of us. And I think we saw a lot of examples of that. Also, I think people in the modern day fail to factor into the equation that when we played these games, a lot of us were kids and we had so much more time to play them. So we were just more practiced at them ourselves. So when we go back and try and play them now, they seem extremely difficult because we don't have the same amount of time to sink into them. I don't know, just a theory. Anyway, back to the article in which they've picked 5 examples of games which may have caused you psychological effects. They include Manic Miner, of course, the pixel-perfect platformer that drove us all insane in the 80s. The article says that this game will give you a permanent 40-point reduction in IQ and a visceral loathing of classical music, thanks to the incessant tinny loop of Hall of the Mountain King. Is it Hall of the Mountain King or just Hall of the Mountain?
Yeah, Hall of the Mountain King.
It is. Yeah. Do you think that's a fair assessment, John, of Manic Miner?
Yeah, absolutely. I find the music in Manic Miner much more of a psychological gauntlet than the gameplay itself.
Yeah. Manic Miner came at a time when you didn't really have music in ZX Spectrum games. So it was kind of...
Some might not call this music, Neil.
Well, yeah, it is borderline, isn't it? But there is a picture of a piano on the screen, just in
That's
case
true.
you're unsure, to say, look, this is music because there's a piano on the screen, even though your ears are bleeding. Another one on the list is Elite, which I'm quite surprised to see on the list. This is the classic space trading game, and it's assessed as such in the article. It will give you anger issues and an obsession with high profit margins on drug smuggling, resulting in a stay in a Bolivian prison later in life. Does that ring true, John? Have you done a stretch?
This one doesn't make sense to me. I understand what the point the article is trying to make, but not only is Elite a pretty easy game to get into as far as the genre is concerned, I'd actually call it a pretty relaxing experience. It's a game you control the pace of, and if you decide not to go the pirate hunting route, for the most part, it's a game where you can just sit back and chill and do your space trucking enterprise. So I don't get this one, Neil.
I agree. Elite is not a game where it's 100% action 100% of the time. It's not pixel perfect jumping. Yes, it could be frustrating if you've been grinding for hours and then suddenly space pirates just destroy you. But it's a game to relax and cruise around the universe and quite literally take stock of things. Take stock of the stock in the back of your spaceship and plan on the map on your wall where you're going to go next. I guess there are different ways of playing Elite, but I wouldn't say it's by default a frustrating game. So that's a controversial one for me. The last game that we'll touch on, and there are more in the article, is one that's come up a few times recently, and a game that I absolutely love, and it's Chucky Egg. And it says, this is a game in which you collect eggs in a vast, menacing chicken coop full of monstrous human-sized hens and a giant menacing duck. This game will give you a crushing sense of futility of existence and ornithophobia, or the fear of birds. John, can you still look a duck in the eye?
Chucky Egg did nothing but increase my love for our feathered friends, Neil.
Oh, okay. For me, yeah, I've got no problems with birds, but perhaps a fear of milkshakes, because that's the game I was playing when I tipped the milkshake all over my Amstrad CPC as a kid. I don't know if there's a term for fear of milkshakes. There should be. Let us know in the comments if there is such a thing. There seems to be a term for a fear of pretty much anything you can come up with, but not sure about milkshakes. Lactophobia, I don't know. So
maybe so. You never know.
So this is, it's a tongue-in-cheek, it's a fun article, and it reminds us that not all retro gaming should be remembered through rose-tinted glasses. If I were to add one of my own suggestions to the list, I would probably add Ghouls and Ghosts. That's not there. I find that frustrating because I find it to be such a good-looking, atmospheric, playable game. Lovely mechanics in that game. I love everything about it, apart from the fact that I don't get to see the game because it's so brutally difficult. And it doesn't feel right cheating or pumping the emulated coin up full of credits to get to the end. I feel like I need to grind and get better at this game, which makes it incredibly frustrating because I want to see more of it. John, how about you? Have you got anything that you want to induct into the Frustrating Game Hall of Fame?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think since this article is coming from the dailymash.co.uk, I think that they want to focus in on, the games from the UK. But there's any number of Japanese platforming games from the 8-bit era that you can include, including the Castlevania games where when you get hit, you get knocked back, which leads to no end of frustration. If you've ever played Top Banana before on the Amiga, that game has caused me permanent psychological damage for sure. It is one of the most disturbing and just mind-numbingly horrible games that's ever been created. So I highly recommend it to all of our listeners out there. It is a game to remember. But I can't help but feel that this article may be trending in the clickbait genre. I know it's hard to believe from a site with a name like the Daily Mash, where you're getting these lists every day, but I have a feeling these games were plucked out of thin air to meet the author's quota for the week. But I hope not. I hope some serious thought went into this.
Yeah. Also, just thinking about it, another game that's frustrating for a different reason when I was a kid was Little Computer People, which I'm sure.
Oh, yeah. Played. That's frustrating in its own way. Absolutely.
It was frustrating because I rode my bike over to the video rental store where they were selling it, bought it, furiously rode back, loaded it up, and then realized it it's not really a game in the
It's not a
traditional
game.
sense of a game. You know, smashing my joystick around, going, well, how do I make him pull his gun out? How do I get out of this house?
Right.
You can't. It's like a Tamagotchi style experiment. So that was frustrating in its own sense. But maybe I should have just read the reviews before spending my money on it. It's my own fault. This could well be a good question of the week, I think. So get thinking. What are your most frustrating games? Check out the article. There's a link in the show notes. And we'll do question of the week at the end of the show today to get your thoughts. Now, before we go on to story 2, there's going to be a wardrobe change if you're watching on video, and it has absolutely nothing to do with technical difficulties we were having recording yesterday. Right, John?
Right. Nothing to do with it at all.
Okay, let's do it.
Neil, when you think computers in space, what springs to mind?
NASA is the obvious one. All that space hardware that's out there. That's at one end of the spectrum. Space hardware flying around the Earth, perhaps at the moment being blown up by other space hardware. There's stories going around at the moment. I don't know if you've seen that in the news. The Russians, I think it is, experimenting with destroying space hardware.
Space lasers, yeah.
Lasers. We're into that part of human history now. Lasers in space.
Yes.
And then at the fictional end, at the other end, Holly from Red Dwarf is one that springs to mind. Always loved Holly. Yeah. Why is that, John? Why are we talking about space hardware?
Well, a sharp-eyed member of our subreddit community has glimpsed one of these interstellar computers, but it turns out they're, computers from the past. Hastian Z, who is one of our subreddit contributors, spotted not one, but 2 classic computers in a recent episode of Doctor Who. In Series 13, Episode 1, which is the episode titled The Halloween Apocalypse, a Commodore 64 cleverly painted black to hide its origins, and a Spectrum Plus 2 were spotted among the computers controlling the observation outpost called Rose. Neil, I've got to ask, are you down with the TARDIS? Are you a Doctor Who fan?
Not a hardcore Doctor Who fan, no. I think the episode you're talking about is the one that aired last week. So I think we're talking about up-to-date Doctor Who. If it's the one I'm thinking of. I've been watching it since when I was a kid. I think Colin Baker and Sylvester McCoy. I definitely remember a lot of Sylvester McCoy episodes. He had an assistant called Ace, I think, towards the end, I remember. And then we had this hiatus where Doctor Who just vanished from our screens for years and years and years before the more recent series, which I say more recent, it must have been over a decade ago that it came back again. But I've been watching it. They came back with Christopher Eccleston, wasn't it? That was the Doctor who came back for the new ones. But don't get me wrong, no, I'm not a hardcore fan. I'm not one of those people that know the show inside out and complain if certain storylines don't tie up or contradict themselves. I just enjoy it for the silly fun that it is. I'm a casual viewer, I guess. I've certainly not been to a convention dressed as the Doctor, and I think if we put
not yet.
No,
anyway.
I think if we put a colourful stripy scarf and a hat on you, I think you would pull off a good Doctor Who impression.
I would love nothing more than to put on a stripy scarf and a hat. You know, I've got to be honest with you though. I've never watched a complete episode of Doctor Who in my life. I started watching it when it was the new series came back, 10 or 15 years ago, and I got distracted and I never went back to it. And I have a feeling it's a show I'd like, but I just there's only so much TV watching time, and it's really sad because I'm totally a cultural Anglophile. I love the BBC and tons of British programming, but this is just something that has passed me by. But maybe this is going to inspire me, Neil, to dig deep into the back catalog. So can you tell me what Rosie, which is this observation outpost, is used for, and why they might need a spectrum to keep this thing in the air?
Well, I have to admit, I didn't spot the spectrum myself. Maybe I wasn't paying close enough attention. It surprises me because as a retro fan, when a retro computer or any computer appears on a screen, a TV show or a movie, it usually just sticks out like a big red flashing light. Your eye is drawn to it immediately. You
Right.
always see these things, don't you? So I must have looked away when it was on there. But if it's the episode I'm thinking about, the most recent one, Rose is this outpost, and there's something called the Flux. It turns up and it's erasing planets, and it's messing around with time itself. And the only thing, apparently, standing between the complete destruction of humanity and time is a ZX Spectrum. Is that right? Is that what's holding everything back? Keeping
Wow,
time and space?
you never would have thought.
Yeah.
Well, I think this is more than likely a nod and a wink to the retro gaming community out there. There's nothing more humorous to your average geek on the street than a bit of technological anachronism. But what I wonder is this an ongoing thing in the series, as far as you're aware?
Oh, I would say I'm not a hardcore fan, so I've not spotted them before. I'm sure I have spotted retro computers in Doctor Who way back. Every now and then you see a keyboard and you think, yeah, that's a C64 or something like that. I don't know. It would be interesting to know if there is a retro computing fan in the Doctor Who team. I'd love to know that. Maybe they've put it in there on purpose. But I'm inclined to say, knowing the BBC over the years, it's probably just what they had in the props department. The first computery thing that they could lay their hands on, grab it, spray it with some black spray paint and slap it in there, job done.
Now, there's an RMC road trip I'd love to see. Neil visits the BBC props department.
And cries at everything that's been spray painted and destroyed.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, I guess Doctor Who isn't technically set in the future, but it does bring to mind all of the sci-fi technology of the past and how some of it looks slightly ridiculous today. For examples, I found this Gizmodo article we'll link to in the show notes that lists 12 quote-unquote futuristic worlds where everybody uses obsolete technology. Some of my favorites from the list include Red Dwarf, which you already mentioned, where in the far-off spacefaring future, everyone still uses VHS cassettes. and Back to the Future 2's 2015, their version of 2015, it featured fax machines as the dominant form of remote communication. If you remember when Marty's dad gets fired, the 87 fax machines go off. So it's always interesting to see how people envisioned our future to be.
There was a lot going on in the Back to Futures, wasn't there? There was an arcade cabinet, wasn't there? With I think it had an NES in there in the corner. We've spoken about in the past.
Yeah, the Wild Gunman arcade machine.
Alongside a hoverboard, as if the two technologies were that aligned. I don't know. But also, I must say, you're a brave man saying that. I think you said a moment ago, technically Doctor Who isn't set in the future. These are the kinds of things I'm scared to say with hardcore Doctor Who fans out there going, no, yes, it does go into the future. So you're completely wrong. But
I will not be offended if you correct me harshly in the comments. Feel free. So again, hats off to Hashi and Z for spotting some classic computers in Doctor Who. And if you have a favorite piece of obsolete tech in a future sci-fi world, let us know about it in the comments.
John, we're going to have a quick look now at a game which is being worked on for our beloved Commodore Amiga. It came to our attention through coverage on the YouTube channel 005 Agima, and that's Amiga 500 backwards, if you were wondering. And Chris, who hosts the channel, takes a trip to the Perth Amiga user group down under. And it's a gathering which is a lot of fun to watch. It reminds me of the Southwest Amiga group that we have over here, just a coming together of Amiga fans, bringing all of their hardware, enthusiasts showing off what they've got, upgrades that they've put in their machines, games that they like to play, and just having fun. And halfway through this video, up pops Dario Sorbello. And he's developing a game called The Lost Asylum, or just Lost Asylum. There's no the, sorry. And he's showing it off on his Amiga. The game, he predicts, is about a year off being finished, so there's lots of work to do. It is a hobby after all. He's not doing this full time. And he's building it using something called the Scorpion engine. And if you've not come across the Scorpion engine, it's a game development tool that you can use on your modern PC. So it gives you a nice working environment. You can compile the game. I think it actually supports multiple platforms. I think I've heard of Scorpion being used on other platforms. Have you come across Scorpion before, John?
Whenever I read about the Scorpion engine, I always hear it referenced in with the Amiga, but that doesn't mean that it's not compatible. I'm not saying that it's not.
I might be thinking about. There's lots of engines like this that give you the convenience of a modern.
Yeah, there's the Red Pill engine is another one that comes to mind. So yeah,
right, yeah. So and when I look at this engine, if you go and look at the Scorpion engine, it actually looks really nice to work with, and it makes me go, yes, I immediately want to go out and start making Amiga games. But of course, a good game dev tool isn't the secret sauce to a good game. It helps, but it takes a whole lot more than that to make a good game. So. Maybe one day I'll get around to trying it. Anyway, John, back to Lost Asylum. Have you had a look at this game, and what are your impressions of it?
It's interesting. I'd summarize it as Mario dropped into the world of Rough and Tumble, if you're familiar with that game. It looks promising. Rough and Tumble is one of my all-time Amiga classics. But on the other hand, since that game already exists, you're setting a pretty high bar for quality. I hope that Lost Asylum does something to differentiate it from that game, other than making the main character look like our favorite Italian plumber.
Yeah. Rough and Tumble. That I was racking my head when I watched this, trying to think of the name of the game that it made me think of, and it's exactly that. I couldn't place the name. I can see lots of influences in the game, though. It's a side-scrolling run and gun style game. A bit of Grisor in there. That's the first run and gun game that always comes to mind when I see these things. You've got cute sprites. You've got a kid as the main character in, as you say, Mario-like colors. He's even got sort of red dungarees and a red hat on there. I'm seeing some classic Amiga effects in there, like a copper skyline that runs down the screen behind the background. I don't think I saw, watching this, I don't think I saw any parallax scrolling yet, which is kind of a classic Amiga effect that
Right.
the machine used to show off. But it is early days, so that might creep in. You never know. But overall, I think it looks pretty decent. It's definitely something that I would describe as looking more like a professional, more like a commercial game than a hobby game. Sometimes you see games made in, I don't know, let's say Amos, something like that, and it can be an excellent game, but there are just these telltale signs that it was made in Amos or some other Blitz Basic or some other package like that. Do you know what I mean, John?
Oh yeah, the game that immediately comes to mind is Super Skid Marks. That was coded in Blitz Basic, and when you see the menu screen looks like, it is just the most plain Jane, really awful looking menu screen I've ever seen in an Amiga game, which is a shame because the actual game is fun. Who doesn't like Super Skid Marks? All of these sort of games have a flavor to them. I'd say that this one also, it does kind of look like a Scorpion Engine game. Everything looks really crisp and clear in a way that I think almost looks unnatural. Not saying that this is a bad game or that the Scorpion Engine isn't good. I feel like it does look like a modern a game that's been coded on one of these modern development platforms. But that doesn't bother me, of course. I'll play if this thing is good. I'll play it. One thing I always worry about with Scorpion Engine games, though, are the system requirements. A lot of times to get a game running at a decent clip, you need either an accelerated Amiga or at least an 040. And not to keep harping on about the genius that is Rough and Tumble, but it managed to run like a dream on OCS ECS machines with just 1 meg of chip RAM. And that's really where the talent and the ability of the programmer shines through. Is it's not the engine, it's not the platform, it's how good are you at wringing out the best that it can give you. And the fact that Rough and Tumble looks better than most AGA games is proof positive that the development team over there, and I think it might have been Renegade that did that. They were pros, real pros. But I do wish the Lost Asylum guys all the luck in the world, and I just hope that they try and optimize the game to run on something like a stock 1200.
Yeah, I guess if they're using an off-the-shelf engine like Scorpion, there's always going to be an element of overhead because the engine's designed to cater to whatever type of game you want to make. It's not optimized for just a run and gun game or just a puzzle game. There's always going to be a degree of overhead. So you can't blame the guys for not being able to optimize it completely. But then, that being said, when you see recent releases like Dread, the Doom clone that came out that runs on an Amiga 500, you look at a game like that and you think, well, there's no reason this couldn't run on an A500. So hopefully they'll get it down. And on the look, you described a modern look. I think you could attribute some of that to the fact that it's being captured on modern hardware, so you're not getting any like CRT bleed or blur or anything like that.
You're right.
So I would reserve judgment until we can see it on proper hardware. But a lot of people will be playing it through emulation and through modern hardware. So, it's an interesting one. Be interesting to know if the art itself is designed to take advantage of a CRT and the color bleed and all of that, or if they're just making it using modern methods. Don't know. But it's certainly one to watch. You can lend your support to Raptor Games, who are making it. You can find their YouTube channel in the show notes, and also Chris at 005 Agama, who, thank you very much, Chris, for showing us this, and the Perth Amiga user group. Definitely a game to keep an eye on, I think.
Neil, Would you consider yourself to be a keyboard snob?
Not a snob. I wouldn't consider myself. I mean, I'm sat here using this tiny Logitech remote keyboard on the podcast PC here, which is pretty horrible to type on, but nice and convenient, which counters the lack of a mechanical keyboard or whatever else that you would define as snobbery. I think mechanical keyboards are normally the first thing that come up when you talk about snobbery.
Yeah.
And, I'm not a snob for the exact switch that you must have on your mechanical keyboard or the amount of pressure that each key needs for an optimal key press. But I do have a mechanical keyboard on my main PC because a super cheap keyboard does feel super cheap to me. A mid-range keyboard is generally fine. So I would normally spend, I think the one I've got was about 50 to 60 pounds. That was hard enough for me to spend on a keyboard. Any more, I would really, really cringe at. But that does seem to get you a really good standard for the snob's entry-level mechanical keyboard, and that's good enough for me, I think. Yeah, how about you?
I'm whatever the opposite of a keyboard snob is. Well, really, one of the main reasons I'm not a keyboard snob is that, I do so many podcasts, and oftentimes, because we run such a professional outfit, Aaron and I, that I'm making changes to things on the fly, which makes me need to type during the podcast as we're recording, and I need a super quiet keyboard to do that. And so I've got a cheap Dell wireless keyboard that is very silent, so I can make all of our on-the-fly changes as we're recording. But it is weird because unlike so many other things in my life where I simply must have the best, the keyboards have always been just kind of a thing you type on. Don't get me wrong. I appreciate the heft, the sound of an old IBM Model M keyboard. I appreciate the fact you can use it as an offensive weapon if you need to. That thing is a beast. But I haven't found it within myself to go down the route of switching out micro switches and adding RGB lighting, stuff like that.
Until now?
Until now, Neil. I have been smitten by keyboard love, which is fitting because this next story comes to us from the one and only AmigaLove.com. We're an Amiga heavy show today, Neil. A forum user there by the name of G.R. Shaw has created a new mechanical keyboard for the Amiga 2000, and it is a thing of beauty. While it fits right in with a big box Amiga, the whole thing uses standard PC keyboard parts, including the case and the keycaps. Anybody who has waited for years, or in some cases are still waiting for those kickstarted Amiga keycaps, you can finally rest easy with another solution. Instead of going the all custom route, he utilized there's a company called the WASD keycap printing service to make special keys like the Amiga key and to get the font on the regular keys just right. Other great features include through-hole soldering only, so you don't have to do any surface mount soldering, which is a nightmare, as you know. There's an Arduino controller, which is paired with something called the QMK firmware. So all the keys do just what they should. You can, do custom jobs, and it's got one of those 5-pin DIN connectors to plug it right into an Amiga 2000 or 3000. So, Neil, have you had a chance to look at this? What do you think?
Yeah, I've had a look. It's quite nice, isn't it, John?
Yeah.
It's not an exact replica of an A2000 layout or look, but it is plug and play compatible with the machine, which is great because if you just need one of those original keyboards, they are not cheap at all. If you can even find them separate from a whole machine sale, they're very rarely split up. There are ways around needing a keyboard with that kind of connector. For example, you can fit a USB adapter inside an Amiga to allow it to use USB keyboards. Some people will put that in and then put a wireless dongle in so you can use a wireless keyboard with it. So, you can get a mechanical USB keyboard on the Amiga, and there are keycaps out there. For example, Steve over at Checkmate has a set of keycaps which he sells with keyboards with his cases, but you can get them separately. I think you can get them separately. But this method is nice because it just plugs straight in. I think that's the big advantage to this one here that you're talking about. Mm-hmm. What I'd love to see this adapted for the Amiga 500, because the very first Amiga 500s that came out of the factory had some interesting differences to what we generally know as an Amiga 500. Namely, it didn't have the A Amiga key. It had the Commodore chicken lips on that key instead. And more importantly, they were mechanical keyboards.
Oh,
And if you've ever typed on one, the quality over the spongy Amiga 500 keyboards that we know and love is night and day. It feels really good to use one of those old A500s. So I'd love to see this be successful enough for them to consider doing it for other machines. There was a Kickstarter. You've mentioned people waiting for Kickstarters that never come to fruition. There was one to put a mechanical keyboard in an Amiga 500. That was last year, and that didn't hit target. I don't think it was by the same people. I think quite a few different people have tried to launch Amiga keyboard Kickstarters over the years. It didn't hit target. I don't know what became of that one, but I am holding out hope that someday we'll see a drop-in mechanical Amiga 500 keyboard. That's what I want, John.
that would be nice. That would be nice. And, you know, there's a chance, and by a chance, I mean somebody posted in the forum right below this saying, wouldn't it be cool if there was an Amiga 1000 keyboard in the works? I'm taking that as it's coming, Neil. Anybody who has an Amiga 1000 knows that those keyboards are getting harder and harder to find. I've got one in the closet right now that is just, it's missing a keyboard, and I can't do anything with it because I don't have a keyboard for it. If one can be developed that uses that phone cord-like cable of the original, that would be a real game changer for all of the keyboardless A1000s out there. So I hope in the future that can come to pass.
I wonder if those curly phone cord cables are still manufactured anywhere. There must be something that still uses them.
I would like to hope so.
Yeah. And I don't know. This is some breaking news, John. I don't know if you spotted it in the last couple of days, but a company called Simulant, who you may remember tried to kickstart a bunch of modern USB keyboards in the style of retro systems. That Kickstarter didn't work out. But they have now put a mechanical USB keyboard together with Amiga keycaps, and it looks like they're not kickstarting it. They're just putting it up for pre-order, so people can pre-order that now. And the interesting thing about this is, although it's USB, so you're not putting it straight into your Amiga, it is an official Amiga Inc. product. So they've obviously taken the time to unpick that minefield of Amiga rights and ownerships and get permission to use the name Amiga, not Commodore, of course. So it's actually got Amiga on the keyboard there, which is interesting. I think it's £100 to pre-order that. So I was talking earlier about my limits of £50 or £60. Does that Amiga name make me want to spend another £40? Well, with my history, probably yes. But I can understand. It's getting towards the expensive, but I've seen a lot more expensive mechanical keyboards. I want some reviews. I want to see how this thing is, if it's as nice as £100 worth of keyboard. So we'll see.
And Simulant's a great guy. He's the mind behind Amiga Addict magazine, Britain's best-selling Amiga magazine. So he stands behind the products, and he is a true Amiga fan at heart.
That was quite the promo, John. Do you need to declare any association with the magazine there off the back of that?
Full disclosure, Amiga Addict is a sponsor of Amigo's Everything Amiga podcast.
There we go. I thought there was some connection there. But he has a history of delivering, certainly with the Amiga Addict magazine and some other products that are in the shop there. So I'm confident that we'll see this come to fruition. The hard work's been done to get that license. So I'm looking forward to seeing it. And also this Amiga 2001, which you've mentioned there, John.
So a big thank you to subreddit user Flatline1972 for pointing this story out for us. It'll get some press on this week's Amigos as well. Neil, last week's community question of the week was Apple II or BBC Micro. Which was the better machine?
Big fight.
So we got some great answers here. Sedition writes, I feel like the poll could have been, did you go to school in North America or England?
Exactly.
He said, I learned on the Apple, but I prefer the aesthetic of the Model B.
Well, maybe we need to transplant an Apple II into a BBC case. Maybe that's the perfect combo.
That would be the way to go. Chocolate and peanut butter combined. Mega STE isn't beating around the bush. He says the Beeb any day of the week. So and that was one of our top most upvoted answers. So people aren't interested in reasoning. They just want the cold hard facts.
Just pure confidence. No need to give fact or reason. Just any day of the week.
That's right.
fine. Okay.
Yeah. And finally, expounding on that a little bit was Silver Rapid. He said the Beeb was technically the better machine, although it did come out later. He gives the following as his rationale. It was twice as fast as the Apple II. It had higher resolution graphics modes up to 640 by 256, a 4-channel sound chip as standard. There was a range of interfaces included as the standard. It had an easy-to-use user port for hobby electronics like the Raspberry Pi GPIO. I'm sure that was what they had in mind when they put this thing out. A novel coprocessor interface, most famously used for testing the ARM, and the included BASIC was considerably better than the Apple II, probably the best one of any 8-bit. And finally, it was about half the price of the Apple II at launch.
Well, I think when you consider there is a 3 or 4 year age difference in these machines, with the Apple II being the younger machine.
1977, Neil. 1977.
Exactly. It's impressive that we're even pitching them up against each other, and that the Apple II is holding its own, and for some beating the BBC Micro, given that is an eon in computer terms, in technology terms. So I think that in itself speaks loud and proud of the Apple.
Yeah, but we do appreciate all of the responses, and you can read them all if you head on over to our This Week in Retro subreddit. Neil, our community question of the week for next week is, what game caused you the most psychological torment? I can't wait to hear some of these responses.
To this. Yeah.
So please post your responses in the subreddit, and we'll read the top 3 most upvoted responses on the air next week.
This Week in Retro was presented by Neil from RMC and John Shawler. It was produced by me, Duncan Stiles. The podcast version of the show is available through your favourite podcaster, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify, and the video version is available on the This Week in Retro YouTube channel.
Join our community subreddit at r/thisweekinretro to suggest and vote on stories we cover on the show. If you watch This Week in Retro on YouTube, please give us a like and subscribe to help us reach new viewers.
If you'd like to support the show, please check out the links to our Patreon and Ko-fi pages in the show notes or in the YouTube description. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week for more up-to-date news for out-of-date tech.